The black car sat in the driveway with its engine running. 7-year-old Sophie stood frozen on the porch, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Through the tinted windows, she could see 2 men in guard uniforms speaking rapidly in Chinese. Her father, Mr. Michael Thompson, was walking toward that car with his briefcase. He had no idea what Sophie had just heard. The words echoed in her mind, "Once he gets in, we drive straight to the warehouse. Derek is waiting." Hello family, welcome back. Please take a moment to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. It truly means a lot to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. So sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Sophie's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to move. "Papa, wait!" she screamed, running down the steps. Her small feet slapped against the concrete as she raced toward him. "Don't get in that car." Michael stopped and turned, confusion crossing his face. "Sophie? What's wrong, sweetheart?" The guard stepped out of the car. They smiled, but their eyes were cold. Sophie grabbed her father's arm with both hands and pulled hard. "They're not your real guards, Papa. They're speaking Chinese. They said something about a warehouse and a man named Derek." Michael's face went pale. He knew that name. Derek was the man he'd fired 3 months ago for stealing company money. The same man who'd sworn revenge in front of the entire office. One of the fake guards reached for his jacket. Michael saw the movement and acted fast. He scooped Sophie into his arms and ran toward the house. "Rachel, call the police," he shouted as he burst through the front door. Behind them, the car engine roared to life. Tires screeched against the driveway as the vehicle reversed and sped away. Rachel, the kind teacher who'd been helping Michael raise Sophie, rushed out of the kitchen with her phone already pressed to her ear. Sophie buried her face in her father's shoulder, trembling. She'd learned Chinese at her old school in Beijing, back when life was different. Back when her birth mother was still alive and the world felt safe. Now that language had just saved her father's life. Michael held his daughter close, his heart racing. How had Derek found them? How had he gotten past their security? And why was this little girl always the one protecting him when it should be the other way around? Rachel finished speaking with the police and looked at Michael with worry in her eyes. "They're sending officers now. But Michael, if Derek is out on bail and planning something this bold?" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Michael looked down at Sophie's small face. This brave, brilliant child had already survived so much. Her biological mother's death. The chaos with Catherine, his ex-wife who'd hurt his own mother. The media circus that followed. How much more could one little girl endure? 6 months earlier, Michael's life had been very different. He was a successful businessman in Boston, living in a beautiful house with his wife Catherine and his elderly mother. But success had brought problems he never expected. Catherine had always been jealous of Michael's mother. The old woman lived with them and often gave advice about raising Sophie. Catherine hated it. She wanted to be the only woman in Michael's life. One evening, Michael came home early from work. He heard screaming from the kitchen. When he rushed in, he saw something that would haunt him forever. His mother was on the floor, crying and holding her arm. Her skin was red and blistering. Catherine stood over her with an empty kettle in her hand. "What is this?" Michael shouted, dropping his briefcase. "Catherine, what have you done?" Catherine's face was twisted with anger. "She called me a bad mother. She said I don't know how to raise Sophie." Michael knelt beside his mother, his hands shaking. "Mama, it's okay. I'm here now." His mother looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "My son, I beg you. Send that woman away. She is not well." Sophie had been watching from the doorway. She was only 6 years old then, but she understood everything. She ran to her grandmother and held her good hand. "Grandma, please don't cry," Sophie whispered. "I will take care of you." Michael called an ambulance immediately. His mother was rushed to the hospital with second-degree burns on her arm and shoulder. The doctors said she would recover, but the scars would remain forever. That night, Michael made Catherine pack her bags. "You will leave this house tomorrow morning. I am calling the police." Catherine laughed bitterly. "You think you can just throw me out? I'm your wife, Michael. I have rights." "You hurt my mother," Michael said quietly. His voice was cold and steady. "You poured boiling water on an old woman. There are no rights that protect you from that." The police came the next day. Catherine was arrested while reporters gathered outside the gate. Someone had leaked the story to the newspapers. By evening, their faces were on every news channel in Boston. "Millionaire's wife burns mother-in-law," the headlines screamed. "Family torn apart by jealousy and violence." Michael sat in his living room that night with Sophie curled up beside him. Rachel, who had been Sophie's teacher at school, had come to help. She brought food and stayed to comfort them. "Sir, your mother will be okay," Rachel said gently. "The doctor said the burns will heal." Michael nodded, but his eyes were empty. "The burns will heal, Rachel. But how do we heal from this betrayal? How do I explain to Sophie that the woman she called Mama could do something so terrible?" Sophie looked up at her father. "Papa, I already know. I saw what she did. But Grandma is strong. She will be fine." Rachel smiled sadly at the little girl. Even at 6 years old, Sophie understood more than most adults. The trial came 2 months later. The courtroom in Boston was packed with reporters and curious people. Michael sat in the front row, his face expressionless. His mother sat beside him with her arms still bandaged. Catherine stood before the judge, her eyes red from crying. The judge was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes. She looked at Catherine over her glasses and spoke in a voice that filled the courtroom. "Mrs. Catherine Thompson, you have been found guilty of assault causing bodily harm. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" Catherine's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client deeply regrets her actions. She was under extreme stress and—" "I asked Mrs. Thompson, not you," the judge interrupted. Catherine stepped forward. Her hands were shaking. "Your Honor, I am sorry. I was angry and I lost control. I never meant to hurt anyone so badly." Michael's mother stood up slowly from her seat. Everyone in the courtroom turned to look at her. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge nodded. "You may." "I forgive her," the old woman said quietly. "She did a terrible thing, yes. But I have already carried enough pain in my life. I will not carry hatred too." The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. Catherine began to cry, covering her face with her hands. The judge leaned forward. "Your forgiveness is admirable, ma'am. But forgiveness does not erase consequences. Mrs. Thompson, I sentence you to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months if you complete anger management therapy." The guards led Catherine away. She looked back at Michael one last time, but he did not meet her eyes. Sophie watched everything from where she sat with Rachel, her small face serious and thoughtful. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded them. "Mr. Thompson, how do you feel about the verdict? Will you divorce your wife? What about your daughter?" Michael raised his hand for silence. "My family has been through enough. We ask for privacy as we heal. That is all I have to say." Rachel held Sophie's hand tightly as they walked to the car. A reporter pushed through the crowd and shoved a microphone in Sophie's face. "Little girl, are you sad your mother is going to prison?" Sophie looked up at the woman. "She hurt my grandma. Actions have consequences. That's what my teacher says." The reporter blinked in surprise. Rachel quickly pulled Sophie away and they got into the car. Months passed slowly. Michael threw himself into his work while Rachel helped care for Sophie and his mother. The old woman's burns healed, leaving pink scars that she covered with long sleeves. Sophie started 2nd grade at a new school. She was quiet and thoughtful, always watching people carefully. Rachel noticed that Sophie had stopped being a carefree child. She had grown up too fast. One afternoon, Rachel found Sophie sitting alone in the garden. The little girl was writing something in a notebook. "What are you writing, Sophie?" Rachel asked gently. Sophie looked up. "A letter. To Catherine." Rachel sat down beside her. "May I ask why?" "Because everyone says she's a bad person now. But I remember when she used to read me stories before bed. I remember when she made me pancakes shaped like hearts." Sophie's eyes were wet with tears. "People are not just one thing, Miss Rachel. They can be good and bad at the same time." Rachel felt her throat tighten. "You're right, sweetheart. You're absolutely right. Do you want to send the letter?" Sophie nodded. "Papa says she's in therapy now. Maybe my letter will help her feel less alone." That evening, Rachel told Michael about the letter. He was surprised at first, then thoughtful. "My daughter has a bigger heart than I do," he said quietly. "Maybe that's exactly what this family needs," Rachel replied. "A heart big enough to hold both justice and mercy." Michael looked at Rachel for a long moment. In the past months, she had become more than just Sophie's teacher. She had become the steady presence that held them all together. 3 months after the trial, life began to feel almost normal again. Michael's mother was cooking in the kitchen again. Sophie was doing well in school. Rachel came over every evening to help with homework and stay for dinner. But Derek was planning his revenge. Derek had worked for Michael's company for 5 years. He was smart and charming and everyone trusted him. But Michael discovered that Derek had been stealing money from the company accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger and larger sums. When Michael fired him in front of the whole office, Derek's face had turned red with rage. "You will regret this, Thompson. I promise you that." Michael had security escort him out. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. Derek spent months planning. He hired men who spoke only Chinese, knowing that Michael's guards didn't understand the language. He watched the house from a distance, learning their routines. He waited for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on a cool October evening. Michael's mother was visiting her sister in New York. Rachel had taken Sophie to the library. Michael was alone in the house when the power suddenly went out. He walked to the circuit breaker in the basement. As he reached for the switch, he heard footsteps behind him. "Hello, Michael." Michael spun around. Derek stood at the bottom of the stairs with two large men behind him. In the darkness, Michael could barely see their faces. "Derek, what are you doing in my house?" Derek smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I told you that you would regret firing me. Did you think I was joking?" Michael's phone was upstairs. The landline was dead. He was trapped. "You can't do this, Derek. Breaking into my home, threatening me, you'll go to prison for years." "Only if they catch me," Derek replied. "And by the time anyone finds you, I'll be in Mexico with enough of your money to live like a king." One of the men grabbed Michael's arms and tied them behind his back. Michael struggled, but the man was too strong. They dragged him upstairs and threw him into a chair. Derek pulled out Michael's laptop. "Now you're going to transfer $5 million to my account. And you're going to do it with a smile." Michael shook his head. "Never." Derek nodded to one of his men. The man pulled out a knife and held it close to Michael's face. "Think carefully, Thompson. Is $5 million worth dying for?" Michael's heart was racing, but he kept his voice steady. "You won't kill me. Murder is different from theft. You're not a killer, Derek." Derek's smile faded. "You think you know me? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You destroyed my reputation. I have nothing left to lose." Outside, Rachel's car pulled into the driveway. Sophie jumped out, carrying a stack of library books. She was excited to show her father the new stories she'd found. But as they approached the house, Sophie noticed something strange. All the lights were off. Her father never left the house completely dark. "Miss Rachel, something is wrong," Sophie whispered. Rachel looked at the house. Sophie was right. Even the porch light was off. "Stay behind me, Sophie." They walked quietly to the front door. It was unlocked. Rachel pushed it open slowly, and they both heard voices coming from the living room. Sophie recognized her father's voice. Then she heard another voice, cold and angry. A voice she remembered from months ago when her father had fired someone at the office. Sophie's mind worked quickly. She remembered that day at the office when Derek had shouted at her father. She remembered his face, twisted with anger and hate. She tugged on Rachel's sleeve and pointed toward the back of the house. Rachel understood immediately. They moved silently through the kitchen, staying low and quiet. Sophie could hear Derek talking in the living room. "You have 60 seconds to decide, Thompson. Transfer the money or face the consequences." "Miss Rachel, we need to call the police," Sophie whispered. "But our phones won't work." He must have cut the lines. Rachel looked around desperately. Then Sophie remembered something. The neighbors. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson next door. "We can go through the back garden." They slipped out through the back door. The night air was cold against Sophie's face as they ran across the dark garden. Sophie's heart pounded with every step, but she didn't slow down. She thought about her father tied up in that chair. She thought about how he'd protected her when Catherine hurt Grandma. She thought about all the times he'd held her when she was scared. Now it was her turn to protect him. They reached the Pattersons' house and banged on the door. Mrs. Patterson opened it, surprised to see them. "Please, ma'am, we need your phone. Bad men are in our house. They have my papa." Sophie's words tumbled out in a rush. Mrs. Patterson didn't ask questions. She handed Rachel her phone immediately. "I'm calling the police right now too." Rachel dialed while Sophie explained everything she'd heard. The police operator listened carefully. "Stay where you are. Officers are on their way. Do not go back to that house." But Sophie was already thinking ahead. "Miss Rachel, we can't just wait. What if they hurt Papa before the police arrive?" Rachel knelt down to Sophie's level. "Sophie, listen to me. The police will be here in minutes. We cannot put you in danger." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was firm. "Papa would never leave me in danger. I won't leave him either." Back in the house, Derek was losing patience. He grabbed the knife from his man and held it against Michael's throat. Last chance, Thompson. Give me the password. Michael closed his eyes. He thought of Sophie. He thought of his mother. He thought of how Catherine's anger had destroyed their family, and how he'd promised himself he would never let violence win again. But what choice did he have? The password is, he began. Suddenly, bright lights flooded the windows. Car doors slammed outside. A loud voice came through a megaphone. This is the Boston Police Department. The house is surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Derek's face went white. How did they? He looked at his men in confusion. They'd cut the phone lines. They'd checked that Michael was alone. How had the police known? One of Derek's men ran to the window and looked out. Boss, there are at least 6 police cars out there. We're trapped. Derek grabbed Michael by the collar. You set this up somehow. This is a trap. I've been tied to this chair the whole time, Michael said calmly. But I think I know who called them. Derek's hands were shaking now. His whole plan was falling apart. The 2 men with him were backing toward the door, ready to run. Don't move. Derek shouted at them. We can still. The front door crashed open. Police officers in protective gear rushed in with their weapons drawn. Drop the knife. Hands in the air. Now. Derek dropped the knife and raised his hands. His face was full of rage and defeat. As the officers handcuffed him, he looked at Michael with pure hatred. This isn't over, Thompson. Yes, it is, Michael replied quietly. The police led Derek and his men outside in handcuffs. Michael sat in the chair, his arms finally untied, rubbing his wrists where the ropes had cut into his skin. Then he heard small footsteps running through the house. Sophie burst into the room and threw herself into his arms. Papa, are you okay? She was crying now, all her bravery melting away. Michael held her tight, his own tears falling into her hair. I'm okay, sweetheart. I'm okay because of you. Rachel stood in the doorway watching them. A police officer approached her with a notebook. Ma'am, we need to understand what happened. How did you know to call us? Sophie pulled away from her father and wiped her eyes. I heard them talking when we came home. I knew Papa was in danger. So Miss Rachel and I went to the neighbors and called you. The officer smiled and knelt down. You're a very brave girl. You saved your father's life tonight. Within days the story was everywhere. 7-year-old girl saves millionaire father from kidnappers. Child hero outsmarts armed men. Bravery has no age. Reporters camped outside their house again. Schools called asking Sophie to speak to students. A big television network offered $100,000 for an exclusive documentary about her story. Michael sat with Sophie and Rachel at the kitchen table looking at all the requests. Sophie, this is your choice. What do you want to do? Sophie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't want to be famous, Papa. I just want to go to school and play with my friends. But what, sweetheart? I want to find Mrs. Bennett. Rachel looked confused. Mrs. Bennett? Your teacher from your old school? Sophie nodded. After the news about Catherine came out, reporters went to my old school. They bothered Mrs. Bennett with so many questions that she lost her job. She disappeared and nobody knows where she went. If I do the TV show, can we use it to find her? Michael felt his heart swell with pride and sadness at the same time. His little girl was thinking of others even in her moment of fame. Yes, he said. We can do that. The documentary was called Sophie Finds Mrs. Bennett. Camera crews followed them as they searched. They called hospitals, schools, and shelters. They posted on social media. But weeks passed with no sign of Mrs. Bennett. Sophie started to lose hope. The cameras followed her everywhere, even to the park and the grocery store. She couldn't play freely anymore. Everyone wanted to talk to her, take pictures, ask questions. One night, she broke down crying at dinner. Papa, I don't want to do this anymore. I thought being famous would help find Mrs. Bennett, but it's just making everything worse. I just want my normal life back. Michael made a decision that night. The next morning he called the TV network. We're canceling the show. My daughter's peace is more important than any amount of money. The producer tried to argue, but Michael was firm. It's over. Thank you for your time. That evening, Michael sat Sophie down with Rachel beside them. Sophie, I have something important to tell you. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and now feels like the right moment. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. I want to officially adopt you. I want you to be my daughter in every legal way, not just in our hearts. Sophie's eyes went wide. But Papa, I already am your daughter. I know, sweetheart. But this makes it permanent. Nobody can ever take you away from me. You'll be Sophie Thompson forever. Sophie hugged him tightly. Rachel wiped tears from her own eyes. 2 days later, an elderly woman appeared at their door. She was thin and nervous with kind eyes. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm Mrs. Bennett's sister. I saw the news about Sophie looking for her." Sophie's face lit up. "You know where Mrs. Bennett is?" Margaret nodded, tears in her eyes. "She's in San Diego. She's been hiding because she's ashamed. She thinks you blame her for losing her job because of all the attention." "I could never blame her," Sophie said. "She was the best teacher I ever had. She taught me to be kind and brave." Michael looked at Rachel, then at Sophie. "Then we're going to San Diego. Right now." They flew out the next morning, no cameras, no reporters. Just the three of them. Margaret gave them the address of a small house near the beach. When they knocked on the door, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes opened it. Mrs. Bennett's hand flew to her mouth when she saw Sophie. "Sophie? Is it really you?" Sophie ran forward and hugged her. "Mrs. Bennett, I've been looking everywhere for you." Mrs. Bennett began to cry. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I failed you. Because of me, you had no privacy. Reporters bothered you because they found me. I ruined everything." "No," Sophie said firmly. "You didn't ruin anything. You taught me that being brave means doing what's right even when it's hard. That's what saved my papa. That's what helped me forgive Catherine. Everything good in me came from you." Mrs. Bennett knelt down and held Sophie's face in her hands. "You are the most extraordinary child I've ever known." They spent the afternoon talking and laughing. Michael thanked Mrs. Bennett for shaping his daughter into such a remarkable person. Rachel promised they would stay in touch. On the flight home, Sophie fell asleep against Michael's shoulder. Rachel smiled at them both. "She's been through so much, but she's still so full of love. That's what makes her special," Michael said quietly. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. Catherine was released on probation after completing her therapy program. She came to the house, humble and nervous. "Michael, I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I wanted to thank Sophie. Her letter in prison reminded me that I could choose to be better. The therapy helped, but her words gave me hope." Michael's mother came out and looked at Catherine for a long moment. Then she nodded. "We are all learning to heal. Go in peace, Catherine." Even Derek, sitting in his prison cell, wrote a letter. "I saw the news about Sophie. Her courage showed me that revenge only destroys the person seeking it. I'm sorry for what I did." That evening, Michael, Rachel, and Sophie sat in the garden watching the sunset. Sophie was finally just a regular 7-year-old again, playing with her toys and laughing freely. "Papa," Sophie said suddenly, "why do you think people hurt each other?" Michael thought carefully. "Because they're hurting inside, sweetheart. Hurt people hurt people. But healed people heal people. Like me and Mrs. Bennett?" "Exactly like you and Mrs. Bennett," Rachel added, "and like your grandmother forgiving Catherine. Real strength isn't about being the toughest. It's about having a heart big enough to love even when it's hard." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. Then she looked up at the sky. "I think that's what the world needs more of. Not heroes who fight, but heroes who forgive." Michael hugged his daughter close. She had saved him twice now. Once from Derek's violence, and once from becoming bitter and cold like the people who'd hurt them. The question for you is this: when someone hurts you or your family, will you choose revenge like Derek or will you choose healing like Sophie? Remember, the bravest thing you can do is not to strike back but to love forward.